Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we celebrate Native American Heritage Month. Today we're going to be joined with Dirk Yao, who is newly appointed as a respected medicine man of the Alaskan Tlingit tribe. He'll be talking about how we can use the white Heron Pioh that is a form of internal cleansing with water for the body to regain its vitality. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Dirk Yao. Dirk, thank you for joining us here on the program.
Thank you, Daniel.
Now, it's been quite a journey for you. Tell us how all this came about.
Yes, sir. Well, it was basically started in when I was at school, college. I was finishing up my Bachelor of Science degree, and in my last year there at the Evergreen State College, I took medicinal botany, and through that period of time, the professor there integrated a lot of different traditions and herbalism and approaches to the body. And for me, as being an alternative holistic practitioner for over 40 years at this point, but I had kind of started remembering different things about growing up as a child and different influences in my interest in the whole process of healing, the mind, the body, the spirit, the emotions, and integrating those things. And one of the models that came up throughout this coursework in medicinal botany was the idea or the concept of the medicine wheel. And the more I studied in certain tribes that have this model, because what's interesting up in Alaska, they use totems and totem poles to tell stories or to show different influences. And so in the lower 48, a number of the tribes that use this concept of the wheel in the four directions and north, south, east, west, mind, body, spirit, emotion. And the idea or Native American definition of medicine to some of these tribes was the idea of balance. And when you're out of balance, you look to those four directions. And so that's how I became more and more interested. And then during the course of this period of time, a number of the people that I saw that I had worked with in Seattle who came to me specifically for health-related issues happened to be some of the people from Alaska. And then at some point, as I kept working with a number of these people, the whole concept came about that I was appointed a medicine man by a community of the Tlinkits, and specifically doing Pioh, P-I-O-H, ceremony, which is precision, it's an acronym, precision intestinal oxidative hydrotoning.
Now, tell us a little more about what that does.
It's kind of a combination, and in my book, Wheels of Wellness, an introduction to White Heron Pioh ceremony, I in the back of the book, in this first book, it's actually a series of 6 books, and in this first book, this is a compilation of many years of lectures, for example, interviews I've done with you, Daniel, on your show in the past years, and other places, articles that I've written, and it's based on observation. A lot of the core of PIOH is coming out of a hypothesis, and in Chapter 4 I talk about this, of observations in that I observed during the course of the people I worked on certain key responses. And when I was presented, and this was coming back from Phoenix, Arizona, finishing clinical training there in counseling and the ministry and so forth, one of the doctors I worked with in Seattle, who referred to me a number of counseling patients that she was dealing with, when we would consult every week, she knew I was interested in learning more about healing and so forth, and she approached me one day and said, "Dirk, how would you like to learn colon hydrotherapy?" And not realizing it be literally something I would be doing in my 35th year now of doing this therapy. And so then at that point, that first year, one of the people who came in to see me was a medical doctor, and he was the first medical doctor over the many years that have come in to see me. And he'd come in based on the fact that his yoga instructor told him to do, quote-unquote, 10 colonics. And so as I was working on him, there was an observation area of the instrument, the colon hydrotherapy instrument, which over the years now I've worked with 12 different instruments. And he basically would ask me, well, what's that coming out? Well, I don't know. Well, Dirk, what's that? Well, I don't know. And then, oh, what's that? Oh, that's a piece of apple. Did you eat some apple? Oh, yeah. But basically by the end of it, he was saying, well, gosh, Dirk, I feel so much better. Thank you very much. And I said, well, now that you've done this 10, would you like to do some follow-up work? And he said, well, no, my yoga instructor told me to do 10, and that's what I'm doing. And at that point, I was challenged. I was challenged by the fact that here it is, I'm working on something that literally is thousands of years old, and in my book I discuss this. Why is the colon so important? And we're told a lot by different types of practitioners, the importance of the colon, and death begins in the colon, and all of this other stuff. But why? Why is that? And so over a period of time, based on that challenge, I thought, well, gosh, if I'd have been able to explain this better, if I'd have been able to identify more of what was going on with the body, then perhaps this very intelligent doctor would be saying, well, wow, yeah, I should keep doing this. And so over that challenge, I began doing research. And this is where the component comes in. And if you look in the back of my book, Daniel, you'll notice 78 books, annotated bibliography, and it literally took me over 30 years to find these books. And a lot of the books, and it's just like in the first, one of the first pictures that you see is of the Mayan ritual enema scene. And the people in the New World did enemas, the Old World, the Egyptians, the Essenes, which were a Jewish sect that lived out in the desert, did enemas on themselves and on the sick as well. They treated the sick. And so you think, okay, is this just a bunch of primitive nonsense, or is there something to this? And so as I began working and observing, that's when it started evolving. And over the next few years, as I learned more techniques, as I worked more consistently and through observation, I began to form a hypothesis. And the hypothesis that's in this first book relates to certain observed phenomenon that when you do certain inputs, you can repeat that phenomenon. And so the phenomenon that's involved here, PIOH, precision intestinal oxidative hydrotoning, involves 4 basic components. The first component being the fact that the colon is a muscle. It's like any other muscle. It can lose its tone, it can lose its shape, and so through a series of what are called return flow technique and visceral manipulation, we're able to evaluate and see what kind of shape that muscle is in and do various influences to tone it back up again, strengthen it, make it work better on its own. So that's one key part to it. The other parts are involved more with what are known as blood cleansing responses. And those responses have to do with 3 major influences. 1, hydration. Hydration to the cell, and the fact that the colon itself has a unique skill set. And if you do the proper influences, you can enhance that skill set. And one of the skill sets that it has is it's able to hydrate the rest of the body. And so I use ultra-purified, pH-balanced water through various techniques, and it's amazing how much water a person will absorb, and at some point you reach a tipping mechanism where you trigger the second big response that you're watching for, again, through thousands of hours of observation, which is drainage responses. And these drainage responses have to do with the immune system and the liver. And those are observable responses. And then the third major influence that we do is oxygenation to the cell. And through again, all of this is done intestinally, that oxygenation, oxidative influence, you're able to send oxygen through the whole body. You're able to oxidize various types of toxins and remove those toxins, among other things. And so that's what PIOH is.
Now, when people go to, I guess, regain intestinal health, what are the reasons they usually come to see you? What happens here?
That's a good question, Daniel. There's a whole range of reasons, and one of my main goals with this book is the amount of suffering that I've seen over the years that has increased. And when I first started doing colon hydrotherapy years ago, I would say, I would see 2 or 3 people a year with cancers or other autoimmune illnesses, life-threatening illnesses. And over the years, that has changed. I would say that at this point, a lot of what I do with people, that I see an average of 4 to 5 people who have been diagnosed with cancer come in a week now. And so the numbers in terms of those types of illnesses have dramatically increased. And if you look at the whole premise of what drugless healing, and again, that fits in very well with the concept of the medicine wheel, is to, number one, do no harm, and number two, you're doing things to enable the only true doctor that you've got, and we've talked about some of this before in other interviews, which is you, the person coming in. And so the people who come in who have been diagnosed, say, for example, with cancer, that cancer has been going on in their bodies for many, many years. And because of the health model that most of us have been raised with, for example, someone, and I talk about this in my book, someone will come in and they're in a state of shock, and I'll ask them, and one of the first questions generally is, what are your goals? Why are you here? And, I just got diagnosed with cancer. And I go, okay, how's your health been? Well, my health has always been good. Okay, I go, okay, have you ever gotten headaches? Oh, gosh, I've gotten headaches for 25 years. Doesn't anybody and everybody get headaches? I just take aspirin. I just take aspirin every day. So in other words, what I see as I interview people is that their habits and have been heavily influenced by the fact that when their body tries to tell them something, their doctor, the first thing they do is they reach for something to make their doctor shut up. And the fact is that you do not get headaches because you're deficient in aspirin. There's something going on in your body that goes back to that model that's out of balance. Maybe, you're sitting at your computer too long and your head is not, is bent the wrong way. Or maybe, you've gotten in a car accident or something that's happened and knocked your spine out of alignment. Or maybe it's your liver trying to tell you something, and the head is one of the ways that the liver will manifest. So in other words, it's like a detective story. And what I try to do is teach people that, to learn to listen to their body, to listen to what their body is trying to tell them, and to do things that will help their body in a positive direction, not add more toxins to their body.
I think what's really fascinating that I'm seeing more and more of, more than during the time when you and I were talking some time ago, is what they call the gut-brain connection now. All of a sudden we're starting to see medical science coming out more and more, and the realization that the gut is the centerpiece to heal most of the body, so to speak. And it's funny how you weren't really hearing that 10 years ago. It didn't seem that way anyway. and now you're hearing it more. What's going on that it took people, in the medical community so long to come around to something like that?
Well, Daniel, it's changing the paradigm, and it takes a lot of energy and effort. And when something is first presented, it's just like the example you bring up. Back in 1999, Dr. Michael Gershon published a book called Your Gut Has a Mind of Its Own, and it was based on research he was doing for a pharmaceutical interest on serotonin production. And when he did his first set of studies, he came up with a shocking conclusion, and that is that before that conclusion was come to by him at first individually, is that serotonin was produced in the gut and the liver and sent to the brain. And most doctors and scientists, their paradigm at the time was, oh no, serotonin's made in the brain. So when he first came up with that conclusion, he was in a state of shock, and he thought, well, if I publish this right now, I'm going to get attacked. I'm going to make sure this is true. So he sent out to a couple different labs, and plus did his own experiments again, and all three, the independent labs and himself, came up with the same conclusions again. And at that point is when he published his book with a lot of, at the time, which should have been considered solid research, and he was still attacked. He was still, and so yeah, you didn't hear about this. Actually, in the first gastroenterology book I saw this in was published in 2006, so 1999 all the way till 2006. And you'll still hear gastroenterologists go the old school and say, oh no, the gut's a sewage pipe, it doesn't do anything, and so forth. And the more that studies are done, the more you find modern research, it proves, again, what the ancestors say, what the old-timers say, that your gut does a lot of different things. The colon, there is a major area of absorption, production of other nutrients besides serotonin. There's your cell salts. You've got calcium absorption. You've got B vitamins. You've got a whole range of activities that are still going on even in the colon itself. And one of the observations I had over the years is when people, after they see me, they say, Dirk, I just feel really good right now. It's this feeling of mental clarity, of well-being, and before I would think, this is just coincidental. Maybe it's because people see they're getting rid of all this, garbage, and it's a lot more than that. It has to do with brain chemistry. It has to do with the gut's ability to balance all of these other systems and fine-tune and magnify and enhance the body's functioning of these systems. So all that does is it proves, again, what the old-timers would say.
It's really fascinating to go back to the old-timers' ways that go back centuries and realize they seem to have a better handle on our health and the way our body functions at times than science does today, isn't it?
Yes, and exactly.
Now, it's really fascinating because when you take a look at this brain-gut connection, and apparently it's estimated now that 70+% of your immune system really resides in the gut. In other words, that's predominantly where you're going to feel either good or bad. So you got to look at this situation beyond just thinking, my intestine is just a sewer pipe. My stomach is made just for digestion. I mean, this is what absorbs what we take in many ways. It's the air we breathe, all of it. It's pretty amazing the responsibility this area of your body has.
Yeah, and I talk about that, and one of the reasons I call this an introduction is I try to take some very basic anatomy and physiology concepts of digestion and so forth, and each chapter builds upon the next, so that by the time you're done reading the book, you have, hopefully, you're catching up to, it's kind of an owner's manual of the colon, if you will. And the thing is one of the parts I go into is how much directly the colon affects your immune system. And in your immune system, the lymphatic system, you've got lymph nodes in your neck, your armpits, your breasts, your abdomen, your groin, your legs. In your abdomen alone, you have over 200 lymph nodes, including the spleen, which sits on top of the splenic flexure of the colon itself. But over and above that, Daniel, and I have some illustrations in the book of this, you have what's called lymphoid tissue in the colon itself. The entire colon has a layer of what's this lymphoid tissue that's responsible for the removal of up to 80% of your white blood cell die-off that occurs on a daily basis. And one of the studies that I cite, and this goes back to the 80s, that was published to The Lancet, and basically it was stated that women who had 2 or less bowel movements per week had a 35% greater chance of developing breast disease and breast cancers. And then you add on top of that the fact that when certain toxins are introduced into the body, and I talk about a quote from Dr. Heinrich Kramer, a cancer doctor, a medical doctor I heard on one of my trips to Germany, and he at that point in time, 2003, said that the 16 millionth synthetic compound had been registered and patented with the U.S. government. 16 million compounds, and these are artificial substances, synthetics, heavy metals, and aluminum, or as the British like to say it, aluminium, is one of those substances that is very tiny molecularly, and that tiny molecular structure gets inside the lymph node. And if you see the lymph system in the lymph node, the whole lymphatic system goes from microscopic to macroscopic, like the spleen, for example, which is the largest lymph node. These bits of aluminum get inside the nodes, create irritation, and cause adhesions to form. So then you have the lymph system becoming blocked. And so as I work with people, part of what we do, and based on their health history, their responses, is we observe the lymphatic drainage. And I mentioned earlier, and the lymph drainage, you can drain during one Pioh ceremony as much as 5 gallons of dead lymph.
Wow.
And that is impossible to do on your own. But because of the unique skill set, again, of the colon, your colon, there's a balance between hydration to drainage responses. And you find this, and again, it took a lot of digging to find some of these things, but in old-time homeopathy, which is the concept of fighting fire with fire, and this is the part that's left out, even in modern homeopathic medicine, is drainage, the importance of drainage. And if you take all these different supplements and herbs and chelators and so forth, but you don't assist the body in the removal of what's being neutralized, then guess what happens? Whatever you don't get rid of gets recirculated and reabsorbed again and has to be restored again. So there's this cumulative effect that we're looking for in these responses.
Now, here's a curious question then, because the colon is a muscle. I mean, think about this. This is what moves things along, and you were talking about how important drainage is. Some people might say, well, what is a healthy amount of bowel movements? And in your book you state, well, if you eat 3 meals a day, you should be having 3 bowel movements a day. And so the question then becomes, what is the cause that causes a colon, and this is for lack of a better word to put it, lazy?
And so there's a number of different factors there, and sometimes, and it's more often than not, it's a combination of sometimes 2 to 5 different factors. But part of it is, first of all, the person's health history. How did they grow up? What kind of diet did they grow up on? As I said earlier, when I first started working with colon hydrotherapy, the people at that time, and again, this has been 35 years ago, Daniel, the people who were older, 50 and older, seemed to respond quicker than the people at that point in time. And again, 30 years ago, people who were 50 and younger, and I thought, well, that's interesting. And then when you look at the definitions a lot of us have grown up with, for example, organic. we're constantly looking for things that are organic. Well, back in the 50s and before, anybody that was growing a garden, that's what they were doing. They were growing organic.
Right.
All the chemicals came along, and again, the old saying that came from a chemical company, Better Living Through Modern Chemistry, whatever, we got really programmed with the idea that all of these chemicals are going to make our lives better. And in actuality, what's happened is that when you have people, like a good example of this is, I've worked on a lot of women over the years, and this goes back to Shirley Temple. Shirley Temple was known for her curls, and when she would get her hair curled, she had to have, I can't remember now if it was 58 curls or 86 curls or whatever, but they would count the curls. It had to be a lot of curls. And so it was funny because when I bring this up to women, for example, who've been diagnosed with breast cancer, I go, well, did you ever get permanence in your hair? And they go, oh my gosh, Dirk, yeah, my mom insisted that I got a permanent every week. And that is a really common story. And what did Shirley Temple end up with? She ended up with cancer. And so when you have people whose bowels aren't functioning properly, sometimes it's their diet they grew up on, sometimes it's different toxins that have a paralyzing, or in other words, the neurotoxic effect. Arsenic is very characteristic of this. Arsenic is a toxic heavy metal. It's found in air pollution. It's found in pesticides, in the food chain, so forth. It has a paralyzing effect on the colon. You've got people ignoring, again, habits. They don't chew their food properly. It can be as basic as that. When you don't chew your food properly over and over and you're eating too fast, you've got these big pieces of food that literally clogging up your pipe, so to speak, and slowing things down. That can be that. Water, not enough water, staying well hydrated. There's those factors. Ignoring the call to nature. People oftentimes say, well, I don't have time to go to the bathroom. I had a young man come into my office, a football player in junior high, big guy. He came in because his dad was worried about him because he only had one bowel movement a month. Daniel,
oh boy.
I know, and I asked, well, why aren't you? I know exactly. Why don't you move your? I don't have time to move my. I said, are you insane? What is going on here? Are people? Don't they know that if they don't go to the bathroom, it's going to cause health issues, health problems, and as they get older? So people need to learn and to change these things around. I mean, I saw a person who worked to get 2 PhDs die of colon cancer. Ooh. Okay, because they went to McDonald's every day while they were working on their thesis. And it's sad because these are smart, brilliant people. They're people that have a lot to offer in society to their families, and because they ignore some of the most basic health issues, they end up suffering for it. Mm-hmm. And that's what this book, as a medicine man, as someone that wants to have positive influence on the community, the book that this book, a lot of it is just real basic stuff, and it's also things that you're not going to find anywhere else, that based on what I said a few minutes ago, the unique structure and the function of the colon itself, why it is such a key in detoxification, and particularly with the heavy metals, the chemicals, the stress. Cortisol, for example, is produced when someone's stressed out. It's the old fight, flight, freeze mechanism where they make this hormone that's supposed to give you a burst of energy, and you run from the saber-tooth or whatever. Well, guess what? Most people are sitting like you're sitting in rush hour traffic and you're stressed out. Am I going to make it to work on time? You make a burst of cortisol, but instead of using it, in running, the cortisol feeds back to your liver and congests the liver, becomes toxic to the liver. So people who have a characteristic weight gain in their abdomens and thighs, oftentimes when we start doing liver detox, we'll see the liver purging, and that cortisol will get purged out, and they drop the weight.
Now, the book is Wheels of Wellness. Our guest today, Dirk Yao. Could you give out a website or a way they can find the book and more information on how to get in touch with you?
Yes. Basically, if the best way to get a hold of me is just my email, Dirk Yao, DIRKYOW, at hushmail.com, HUSHMAIL. That would be the quickest way. I do have a website. It's www.whiteheron, all one word, WHITE, Heron, HERON.com.
Very good. Dirk, it was a pleasure to have you back on the program today.
Thank you, sir.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. You can discover more by visiting us at Beyond50Radio.com. That is the number 50. We encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter. Be sure to stay in the know with the Beyond 50 Radio program. You can also follow us on Twitter at Beyond 50 Radio and like us and look for us on Facebook as well. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 Radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.